welcome to the Bitcoin Consciousness Podcast. I'm here today with FractalEncrypt. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here today.
Yeah, so I invited you here because I read your brilliant piece, Bitcoin and Psychedelics, in Citadel 21. And I was really amazed with your deep experience and knowledge of Bitcoin, but also psychedelics. Could you start with telling us how you started with psychedelics, how it came into your life and how it has developed?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure. I think early on in my life, I became interested in psychedelics. I even, well before I used them, I remember maybe being a very young teenager, and it could have been as early as when I was in middle school, I want to say late 80s, that I did a project in my, I guess it was my history class, on drug references in the music of the 1960s. So that was probably the earliest time I remember myself looking. Actually, no, you know what? I think even in second grade, I did one of those diorama projects, although this wasn't on psychedelics. It was on, I think, like the Cali Cartel. And I think on my like little diorama board that I brought into elementary school, I had like little fake bags of cocaine and like articles from the newspaper. So I guess I've always been interested in things to alter your consciousness. And luckily I was able to learn from the time when I did that second grade project to the time where I actually got access to these things, that there was a stark contrast between some of these substances, and that some of them have a certain path that they bring you down, and that you have to be just aware of the different paths that different substances can lead you down. Because I remember a friend in high school telling me, he started smoking cigarettes, and I was like, man, that's like so crazy. Why are you doing that? He's like, oh, this isn't going to get me. I'm not going to become addicted to this. And I think he still smokes cigarettes to this day. So it's like, which is 30 years later. So, it's like, you have to recognize that some of these things do have the tendency to enslave you. They give different psychoactive properties. However, not all things are equal. So psychedelics, I think, came to me probably when I was in my early high school years. I remember going to a nightclub. I was able to get a couple hits of LSD, and then me and three friends went out to a peninsula in the Florida Everglades. It's basically out in the middle of the swamp, and his dad just actually took us out there and just left us there for the night, or for the weekend really. And basically we lit a fire. We had this peninsula all to ourselves, and I really got to experience kind of what it was to kind of take these psychedelics in an environment that was totally disconnected from my everyday experience, because I wasn't used to being out in this type of environment at all. So it was a real disconnect, both environmentally as well as mentally, emotionally, spiritually. So it goes back for me a long time. I'd say that experience was back to the early 90s. So as far as timing goes, now we're in 2022. So there's probably 30 years of psychedelic investigation that's gone on between now and then.
Yeah, that's a long time. When did you start go into it more deeply, like the knowledge you describe in the article? Seems like you researched a lot.
I'd say before I ever even was brave enough to put, a tab of LSD, I would consider to be a huge amount of research. So back in the pre-internet days of, the early 90s, that meant actually jumping on the bus and going down to the main library, actually every library that you could find, and like reading every single book that I could find that even peripherally mentioned psychedelics. And I came across all kinds of interesting authors that really aren't even referenced today, and all kinds of books and different materials that I just had to piece together all the different information. And I remember going to one of the places with one of my buddies, and he was looking through one of the books, and he's like, this book says that LSD is mostly done by janitors and garbage men and people like that. And that's like, this is the type of information that was out there, amongst other things, like the actual patents for how to make LSD. And, like, you had a wide variety of different materials that were available. So I had done a huge amount of research before I ever even put the chemical into my body, I think. So that would probably be like a year or two of just like reading about it and thinking about it, and like kind of getting myself ready, so that by the time I actually was able to find some, I had like at least a base understanding. But then I came face to face with the reality that no matter how much you read, no matter how much you think you're prepared for the psychedelic experience, like there is no substitute for actually taking it. It just, like, there's no way you can truly prepare yourself for this experience, because there's no way to to read about it and fully comprehend what happens within that experience. And probably for each of us, it's different. So, you know, my experience is going to be completely different from your experience. So there's no way I could tell you my experiences and then have that translate reliably into your experiences, because we have different personal body chemistry. We have different sets of knowledge and emotions and feelings going into these things. So all that matters. And so, yeah, I came face to face to the reality that there's a big, huge difference between reading about it and doing it.
I've only done it one time, and that was about 20 years ago. And that was, I mean, LSD then. Okay, then I also tried some magic mushrooms. And if we focus on LSD, I only did it one time, and it was a very, very strong experience that I can remember until this day. Like you said, it's not really possible to compare each other's experiences, but I would like to go into more of what you experience in there. So since you continue to do it again and again, and it gives you this inspiration, and could you try to explain what happens when you do this kind of trip?
Well, I'd say it's going to be dependent completely on, you know, your intentions going into it and the doses that you're taking, and your familiarity with the substance. So like you said, when you do it one time, it doesn't give you a lot of chance to get your feet wet in sense. So you don't have a lot of time to acclimate yourself to the experience or understand how it makes you feel in certain conditions. I remember in high school basically going through a week of training where I just did LSD pretty much every single day for a week or two, and we just tried to do every single thing that you do. We didn't have school in the summer, so it was like, okay, we can just learn how to live like this. And, you know, because there was always the thing like, hey, what if you get stuck like this? What if you're stuck tripping forever? So we better train ourselves on how to figure this stuff out. So it's like do every daily process and go through your life like this. And that ridiculous experiment actually probably gave me some sense of familiarity and comfort with like the way that I react in different situations. And it really gave me a lot of, I guess, personal rules that are set. So, okay, like when you do these things, you want to set up the experience in these type of ways. So it helps you configure your parameters. Like you say, you configure your Bitcoin node. So you're kind of configuring your parameters appropriately, setting what's valid and what's invalid for your personal rule set as far as these things go. So I think that there's a huge amount of benefit in just doing it once, because there's really doing it once, it's like a 0 to 1 type thing. Doing it 0 times is so far different than doing it one time, where the difference from doing it one time to 1,000 times is not as different as the time from doing it from 0 to 1. So once you pass at least that hurdle, that gives you the sense that you've actually been there, and then there's a lot of facility to then access those realms again. So once you've actually gone there, some people don't actually need to keep going back into the experience. I choose to, because it's valuable for me, and I tend to enjoy it. And like I actually find a lot of value for myself within the experience, and kind of the perspective shift that it gives me to set my life up and goals and things like that for the future, and also make assessments of how I've been living up till now. You know, if I'm being true to myself, it kind of gives you a second to go outside of yourself and look at yourself in the way that others see you. So not how you normally experience yourself, but how does the world experience you, or how does another consciousness perceive you. In a sense, your consciousness has shifted, so you can look at these things in a different way. So
Yeah, so changing the consciousness you mentioned, this podcast is called Bitcoin Consciousness. Right? So it's about consciousness, and how we define consciousness is maybe not so easy to do, but it's like a room. Like every level of consciousness is like a world. Like we can be still in the same physical world, but how we see that world and how we see ourselves is different. So if we're in one consciousness, we see ourselves and the world in one way, and then we go into another consciousness, we see it from different reference points, you can say. Do you experience this, that you come to the same consciousness, like the LSD consciousness, when you take these? Or do you experience like sometimes you go to LSD 10 and sometimes you go to LSD 3? That is different levels of consciousness, or is it like the same one that you come to every time?
Wow, there's like so much within this question to go through. So first off, the what is consciousness question is super deep, because that's always brings me back to the simulation theory, and you know, like what is reality? Really, like everything that we have is consciousness and perception. We can't really be sure of anything else outside of it. So there's that aspect of it, and then also the aspect that you touched on, where each person is a facet of consciousness. So it's like there's this big, huge jewel of humanity, and each one of us is a facet experiencing reality through our own specific lens. So I definitely think that I've had certain experiences where I felt like I certainly was other people in different places, like in different times and things like that. So I don't know how real that actually is, but certainly at the moment that I was going through it, it felt like I was looking through a different facet of that prism and actually getting to experience the world in a slightly different way than I'm used to, or it could be dramatically different ways. So I do think there's an interesting relationship there, but I also think that there is a specific map of consciousness that you access as you go into these places. I think it's far more apparent with something like DMT than something like LSD. Like DMT, for example, when you go in there, it's extremely alien, and you know, in a sense, it's like each time you go in there, you can build a map that goes a little farther into it, and you become a little more familiar with the territory, but it's always the same territory that you're entering. So this map is still valid as you're going through and investigating, because you're just mapping further territory within this same, as you called it, consciousness, or the same territory that you keep revisiting. Mushrooms also seem to have a very specific space that you'll enter. And I think a lot of this expresses itself more at the higher dosage level. So when you do a smaller dose of something like LSD or psilocybin, they tend to be somewhat similar, but they express their potentialities and their characteristics a lot different at higher doses. So mushrooms definitely have a very earthy nature vibe, a very, I kind of think of them as like a very flowy or amorphous vibe. And LSD is a very precision mathematical space where things are highly ordered, and you get very precision mathematics and very precise patterns that occur. So there is definitely a space that you enter that is self-similar. So there is these fractal patterns within the psychedelics themselves, and they also are similar to themselves in some ways, but branch off fractally as the dose increases.
Yeah. And do you experience a guiding force through these meditate or for me it's meditations, and for you it's trips?
Sure.
So when I go into meditation, right, then the first part is to really center myself. And when I come to this cross point of time and space, that's when I move into other worlds or other consciousness. And then I tend to be guided somehow, because it's like, basically it's like fears or stuff like this put in front of me. And it's like, then you can try to avoid them, but you will just get stuck and have problems. Or you can see those fears and go into those fears. And when you do that, you sort of surrender. So your ego or your mind sort of surrenders, and then you go into that fear. And on the other side, you have no control, right? So it's like you then come into a place where you have no control. You just have awareness. And then you're sort of guided along further on. Can you relate to this?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you further explained it, because at first when you asked the question was like, I don't understand what you mean, but then you explained it and I fully, absolutely 100% understand what you mean. So I think that there is, I don't know that there is actually like a guided component to the experience itself, but what I definitely notice is that there's a flow to the experience, and if you fight against that flow, that's where bad things happen in the psychedelic experience. For example, if you're if you're going through the experience and you come up against some psychic barrier, like, hey, something comes up from your past that you don't want to deal with, or thoughts that you don't like, or something about yourself that you don't like, and you don't want to like go through this, and you're like, whatever, and you fight against that part of the experience to try to change it. Like, I want to think about rainbows and bunnies and cool stuff, not like I don't want to think about all the bad stuff that I've done in my life and possibly address that and go through that. But actually, that's the thing that you need to do. So that flow is kind of directing you, actually, even though it's to an uncomfortable place, it's to a place that you need to visit at this time, maybe. You've done this for a reason. There's, probably no coincidence that this is coming up for you. So if you try to fight it, that's where, you get into weird thought loops, and you're going to have bad trip type situations. You're going to just, like, things are just not comfortable. You're basically going fully against what the flow is. And unfortunately, the best thing for you to do is just to go with that flow. Sometimes you'll have the experience flowing in such a such a dramatic way that you'll actually confront what feels like an actual near-death experience. You'll actually go through one of these experiences that feels like you're gonna die, and like, oh my god, like, what's everybody gonna think? Of like, took this drug and now I'm gonna die, and this is like what's actually happening. But when you go through that experience to the other end, and many times there's a rebirth type situation where you realize, hey, like, I didn't die, this is safe. And that is actually very, in one sense, humbling, but also very confidence building and resilience building. So by going with the flow, and those ego death situations are very rare. I don't want to like scare people and think like that's like a very common thing, but going with the flow is a super common thing. Like for the trip itself to have some kind of a flow or some kind of direction that it's taking you, if you go with that, I believe that there are some benefits that you're going to leverage by actually just following that flow of the trip instead of fighting it. So I think that there definitely is something that guides the experience. I have no idea what that is. I would just imagine it's your brain telling you this is what you need to address. This is like, now that we're in this space, this is what needs to come up. This is what you need to look at to grow as a person. And if you do, we could get through this together. And if you don't, well, you're stuck here, and we're going to keep going through this, every single time. And a lot of times you'll find that there'll be a recurring theme in your trips. If you do take them over and over again and you don't learn from what it's telling you, it will kind of keep smacking you with that same realization until you either get it or you're just like, I don't like psychedelics, or bullshit.
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting perspective. So from a spiritual point, it's like we have this higher self, or we can call it natural intelligence. So it's like, see ourselves as having a physical body and a mind, and then we have this soul or natural intelligence, or whatever you want to call it. So that's actually the intelligence that created this body and the energy body and everything. So when we go into meditation, though, or trips, when we surrender, we actually surrender to that part of ourselves, our higher self. So that's the spiritual lens, if you want to say so, to what you describe. And this is what we do in meditation. So it's like we come into meditation, we silence the mind, and then we surrender to our higher self that then guides us to very similar to what you said. So it can be a situation in life where we can't see the other side of the story. So we are able to experience the other side of the story to understand that person, and to visit childhood traumas, and or maybe just larger perspectives, maybe just a perspective, like for example, Bitcoin. It comes in these kind of things. It's like your higher self is just showing you, this is Bitcoin, this is how it connects, this is how it's connected with the creation and how it will help humanity and all these things. So that's more about like visions. So it's like visions, and then you have where you work on your programming, all right, all the stuck traumas and stuff like that. And so it's like a workspace. And when I read this article, it's really like, it's so similar to how I meditate. You use these psychedelics to come into that workspace. It's almost like an office where our higher mind takes over and sort of shows us stuff. And we just listen and learn and understand and engage with this. Does that make sense with that spiritual lens on what you say?
Absolutely, that's a very interesting way to look at it. And I think, like, unlike my sciencey lens part of my mind, like the lens metaphor actually is very appropriate. And I was talking to Tomor about this after I wrote the article. I was like, damn, I meant to put this into the article, because I have this jeweler's lens that I wear, and you kind of wear it on your head, but it has multiple lenses that you can keep putting in, and with each lens you get a greater magnification. And I think that things like Bitcoin and psychedelics are these different lenses that you can bring about to increase the magnification to see what's actually within yourself. So for example, you have um, the one lens coming down, and what you had is always there. You know, it's not like these things are bringing something to new to you in some sense that wasn't already within you. You like, it's more like this is already here. You just didn't notice it because it wasn't, you didn't have the proper lens to view it. So it may be an infrared lens, a night view lens, whatever these lenses that you're combining, they're now giving you access to see what was what was already within you. And by actually being able to see that's within you, you've now identified it. And kind of like G.I. Joe said when we were kids, knowing is half the battle. So once you can actually witness these things from stacking these different lenses together and gaining that additional clarity that each one brings, and without these lenses, you just can't see them, is one of my main points. So there is some sense of proof of work to all these technologies, to Bitcoin, to psychedelics. Like you know, by using them, that's the way that you're going to access these things. You know, it's by actually using Bitcoin, sending some transactions, learning how it works. Same thing with psychedelics, by actually going from zero experiences to having one experience. That is a huge leap. And you know, by planning these things appropriately, using these tools appropriately, you're going to leverage some kind of benefit for your life. And there's some bit of intentionality to this. So I don't know if this is true with meditation, but with psychedelics, many people will have the experience where they'll go up, they'll have this great insight, or they'll have these great realizations about themselves and their lives. But then, you know, like after the experience is over, they just don't have really the set of tools to understand how to take that insight and then turn that into action in their daily lives. So 2 days later, 2 weeks later, they're back in their same situation. So I would imagine with meditation, it's similar, where you kind of have to have some sense of how to actually take the benefits that you get from doing these things and then expressing them in the real world. For me, meditation, I just haven't done too much of it, and I just don't really like. To me, I like LSD as a technology for consciousness expanding because it's super reliable in the sense that when you do it, it works. Like there's a certain amount of this molecule that does X amount to me, and I know reliably that it will always do this. Whereas meditation is not so reliable to me. In fact, like to me, my mind doesn't like to be quiet in many ways. It likes to think and do like weird complex gymnastics all the time. So it just is probably me as a personality, but I don't know, like that, it just tends to be like the way that my mind filters. It's kind of like a Bitcoin node where it's like these things that are evidentiary and actually can prove themselves out quickly through using them, I accept, and things that like I test out and like I'm not able to leverage. I kind of, I guess you have to do that to some degree. You have to filter your life to focus on the things that work for you. But yeah, just for me, meditation, I just don't have much frame of reference for that. But I totally understood what you were saying.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's a lot to dig in here. So you said that we need tools. So if you have a trip and you see stuff, and then you cannot implement that in your life, then could you talk us through your method, how you implement insights, so you how you actually change your life from these?
Sure. Like I have gotten a lot of I have gotten a lot of repeated messages through psychedelics, where it's like you have a certain life thing that you're doing. For example, you know, at this point, it's like statute of limitations over. I can't really get in trouble for it anymore. But like back in the '90s, one of my jobs was selling LSD. Like I was so involved in what it was. My life was so transformed that I just wanted the whole world to have access to this, but also not access to any old stuff, but the best quality. Like just I was trying to be like the quality control department and make sure like the very best stuff in the world was what was getting out. And I was very, you know, like that was like my mission for a while. But at some point, like I wasn't very good at that, and I kept getting in trouble and arrested. And so like I was just a very poor drug dealer. So like I just learned, like that was one of the teachings that I kept getting from psychedelics, was like, hey, like this is not safe for you. You actually can't continue doing this and remain a free human being. I actually had one of my best friends get caught and go to jail for a relatively large amount of LSD, and he ended up doing life in prison and actually died in prison in 2014 during that life sentence. So some people, he probably got a similar message to what I did, to be honest. But by the time like I even found out that he was in prison. I had already stopped for a few years. I was just on the internet doing some research on conspiracy and LSD, and like his case came up. Like I saw like his trial paperwork on the internet, and I was like, holy shit. So I actually wrote him a letter, and like then we actually started a whole campaign to try to get him out of jail. We started a change.org campaign. We got him 100,000 signatures to like have him given clemency from Obama when they were giving clemency to different prisoners. And he actually died before Obama had a chance to give him clemency, unfortunately. But we did have another guy in there that was doing life for LSD. His name is Timothy Tyler, and we did get him out. He's out. He's free today. He had a life sentence for LSD, and he was given clemency. He had no further chances in the legal system. Like he had exhausted every single appeal, just like my buddy Rudd Walker, rest in peace. And it's just so for me, I was able to take those lessons from the psychedelics before it got to that point of me going to jail like those guys did, and like I was able to change my life. And now like I still spread that same message. Like I'm still spreading the message that psychedelics are good and wholesome and they're beneficial for you, but I'm not doing it in a way that endangers me or my family or my livelihood or my freedom. So that was one of the lessons that I personally got and how I leveraged it to like change my life. But it wasn't something that I got very quickly. It was something that I had to like live with for a while. Like I was actually even like it was invading my dreams, even like the thought that, hey, you're sleeping in this house with so much crazy stuff, like you could spend the rest of your life in jail, and like that, like you can't even sleep, like these weird dreams of police invading your place. And it wasn't just a dream, like that actually happened to me a bunch of times. Like I actually got kicked out of college at one point. 3 different police departments raided my dorm and stuff, and I actually had LSD in there, but they couldn't find it. They found like a couple grams of weed, but it's like, I don't know, all this stuff definitely has its lessons for you. And it doesn't have to be as dramatic as that. Like there's a lot of more subtle messages, but I think we all have paths in our life that we're on that maybe are dangerous at some point, and if you don't recognize that in time, you pay the consequences for it.
Okay, so let's talk about Bitcoin and psychedelics. Did you find that you were able to understand Bitcoin better during some trips, or is this part of your normal thinking process more?
Oh no, definitely Bitcoin and LSD are very complementary technologies. Like I said before, the high precision that I get from taking LSD that kind of happens in my mind works well with the high precision that Bitcoin displays, both in like the way that it works as a technology and at its very base level in its code itself. So looking at its code, there's just a lot of math and precision that happens in there. And so these things are very complementary, and I definitely learn a lot from looking at Bitcoin and using Bitcoin in different ways while on LSD. And there's actually super safe ways to do that. And the way that I would recommend is by using testnet. So you can do things totally for free, penaltyless, without losing money or anything crazy, and do it all on testnet and it's like a playground where you can kind of figure out how things work. And almost everything that you can do in testnet will work in real Bitcoin. There are certain things that don't actually work. And one of the really tricky things that happened to me was that on testnet, I was able to encode very long messages. Like I could encode messages that were longer than actual mainnet Bitcoin allows me to do. So the first time I did it, I was getting these weird error codes. I think it was error code -126 or something. I tried to Google it and I couldn't figure out what the hell it was. Eventually I went on Bitcoin Talk and somebody told me, your message just is too long. You get 80 bytes. In essence, that type of editing and detail figuring out is all stuff that you can do later. You don't have to be using LSD to figure out the fine details or the little minutia. But to get the big picture, holistic view of how these things work together and how they interact both on a network level as well as in your life, and how you can use the lessons from Bitcoin. So for example, like the don't trust, verify, or the proof of work ethos. You're not going to get any benefits unless you put in some work. These type of things can be actually integrated into your life by thinking through them. On psychedelics, I don't think you need psychedelics to get to those type of thoughts, though. But I definitely think for me, it's one of the things that happened for me.
Yeah, another way to look at it is it's the right brain, right? So on the left side we have the rational thinking, and then on the right side we have the intuitive thinking. So it seems to me, so for example, I had an episode with Gigi, who talked about, he had this like a trip for 3 days where he was Bitcoin blow his mind, literally, like he says, and he saw all these visions and so on. So I use meditation, or it can come spontaneously, like for Gigi, or it can come with psychedelics.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy, because each of those three paths are like three rivers that all lead into the same ocean of truth. So it's each of them are different tools, and I guess the most random is the spontaneous experience, but it's still the tool of your own mind, body, and world experience. He put himself into that conference in Riga. He put himself around those same people, and that in itself can be psychedelic. You don't always need a molecule to induce a psychedelic experience, although, like I said, it's more reliable if you know your molecule and your dose. But some of this stuff can just happen through different means, I suppose.
What about energy fields, spheres, clouds, beings, and stuff like this? What's your experience with this?
I don't have much experience with any kind of stuff like that, although on DMT I did have some like entity contact experiences that I had that were pretty interesting, where it kind of felt like there was, another consciousness. Like I was saying before, how you're kind of in the DMT space, you're mapping out further and further into the space, and part of that was that this self-similar space had entities that resided within it. And I think to a big degree that was like, I was a huge Terrence McKenna fan, so he probably put that inception in my brain, and it's just like a reflection of me like seeing that. But it was certainly felt real while I was in those spaces, that there was definitely these super weird like alien type consciousnesses that were there, that were not me, and were kind of observing me or interacting with me in some way. But that was like high dose DMT. I think on any other psychedelic, I didn't have any kind of entity contact type experiences. But with DMT, it was so interesting that I definitely went on a little path for a while, trying to investigate what this is and what do these questions all mean, and what actually is going on here, because the DMT space is so perpendicular to normal consciousness. It's so 90 degrees to what you're normally used to experiencing and thinking, that it's just super confounding to the curious investigator. So I spent a long time trying to investigate what the heck is going on here. I never got to the bottom of that rabbit hole. To me, there was just more questions on top of more questions, and I just wasn't able to resolve any specific answer. So while I still love it, I just haven't done it in many years. But that was kind of where I had that entity type contact. Normally, it's just that I'm in contact with myself. And I say with different psychedelics, like, I think that is one of the things. It's like, what are you coming into contact here? So DMT was a very much not related to you, not related to your life experiences, not related to what you've done in your life. It doesn't bring up any of those type of things as far as a psychedelic experience. It brings you to another world where you're looking at totally alien things and seeing stuff that just has no frame of reference for you, whereas other psychedelics bring you completely in touch with yourself and who you are, what it is to be you, what it is to be you within a circle of other people, and how big does that circle go to encompass the world, and then how far out after the world. So some of these questions, are driven by the molecule as well.
Yeah. And what about the energy body, or what I call like the blueprint? It's because it's like the physical body is a representation of a blueprint. So when I go into meditation, I can see the blueprint, or feel or experience the blueprint. So whatever, like an organ, it has a blueprint, and then it's like a emotional body. So it's like, it's a space, or it's a consciousness where all emotions are stored, all the blocked emotions, all the free emotions. And then it's like a mental body. So it's like another space where the thinking process goes on. Have you had any experience with these?
I mean, when you call it the energy body, my skeptic mind just goes into recoil. I even like had listened to some earlier podcasts, and I was telling my wife, like, yeah, I don't think I have an energy body. I heard him talking about the energy body thing, and she was like, well, just tell him your wife is a priestess and she totally gets all this stuff. And she always says I'm way too, so I don't believe anything goes on with all this stuff. But I don't know much about energy bodies. I don't really have much frame of reference for that.
Yeah. I'm just curious to see. Like you said, everybody have different experiences, and so if I try to think back on my LSD trip 20 years ago, and maybe it was not so much about the energy body. It was, I remember so much walking around and really seeing the light in everybody on this party. So it was on a beach in India. It was a party, and it was just like amazing. And everybody there, because it was a birthday party, so they had trips for everyone. It was the birthday boy or man. He had a bottle and he gave everybody one drop. So it was like a big party, like 100 people, and everybody took LSD. So it was this like a different world, very different world. So usually when you walk around, everybody's afraid, everybody's paranoid, and they don't look you in the eyes. And then when we were in this party, it was like everybody was like our best friend, and everyone saw the good in everybody. And that was probably one of the strongest things. Is this something that you experience?
Absolutely. And there's a lot that this actually brings up in my mind as well, because there's something huge to be said about both the tribalism aspect that can occur through shared psychedelic experiences, as well as the fact that these shared psychedelic experiences tend to create a much different type of reflective surface than a individual psychedelic experience. So I would say something that I didn't bring up before that is part of the way that I use it is that I almost always do it just by myself. And that is mostly because I can limit all distractions. You know, I don't have to worry about anybody else or what they're doing or how they're feeling or any of this stuff. Like I'm completely in control of my environment, you know, like full sovereignty and like, you know, environmental control setting and all that, because I've limited out so many distractions by just keeping it as only myself. But there's something to be said for these group psychedelic experiences that happen. And as I told you earlier, my job in the 90s, like that was whole spurred by the early 1990s rave scene. Like this was a huge technological psychedelic tribe that was forming in my early teenage years that I was able to join into, and that just changed my life to be able to have these type of experiences with other people, you know, out in the open with lights, dancing, music. Like, and this is something that goes back to our history going through, you know, as we were a tribal culture coming up from, you know, the evolution of human beings. We sat around fireplaces with drums and dance and music and had these shared ecstatic experiences together. So that's something that I miss in today's society, the post-COVID society. We lost like the music festival culture that was kind of blossoming through the 2000s and into the early 2020s, I guess, or the pre-2020s, since we had the COVID thing happen. So I feel like that's something that's been lost, and we'll have to try to regain that, hopefully at some point.
You mentioned in your article about computer technologies and California area and all of those pioneers there. And then I also have read a lot about the music scene and LSD, and it was all around California area, and it was really happening. It's like the modern Mecca, you could say, because it's, if you look at history, a little bit zoom out to history, at least for a few hundred years, and then it's like a huge boom happening there in California, where they started creating computers, computer programs. They started doing these very different kind of musics, and it was just spreading all around the world from this area. Could you talk a little bit about your research or your feelings about what's going on there?
Absolutely, and I definitely think there's some really interesting information to look at. That very small nexus in time and place that was happening when computers were first being developed, psychedelics were first coming into the public consciousness, and also public cryptography was first being developed. So all these things were happening in a very, very small place in time when you look at the global physical span as well as the time spans involved of human history. We have this one little pinpoint area that's happening in California that starts basically in the 1950s and probably spreads through the 1970s. Though I would also argue that the early rave scene happened probably first in the California area, and a lot of things happened first in California as well. So maybe there is something additional going on there. But due to where things like the Stanford Research Lab and Menlo Park and places like this and Sun Laboratories and all these early technological giants that were popping up with the mainframe computers and the very first early computer systems, a lot of that was funded, basically was funded through the US government, Department of Defense. They wanted access to these computers. So in a sense, there was a big push for control, like using these systems of computation as systems of control, as ways to control the population, as something that should be in the hands of the government and not the common man. But the problem for them was that the people that were developing these technologies were sitting in the same soup as this LSD thing that was happening. And part of that was happening because there was other experiments that were going on. There was George White, who was a super underhanded, like weird CIA operative that was dosing prostitutes in San Francisco and their johns underhandedly and kind of sitting behind a mirror and just writing down what happened to them. And then they also had, similarly in Menlo Park, right, where Ken Kesey was before he wrote the Electrical Aid. Oh no, he didn't write Electrical Aid. That was Tom Wolfe writing about him. So the Ken Kesey thing happened basically in the same exact geographic area where they were testing it out at a mental hospital on local students and basically just paying them to get their insights and what they thought about these different substances, I guess, to do government research for. And again, it's like as they're trying to use, just like the computation, they're trying to use these tools of the mind as tools of control. But you have people like Ken Kesey who go under the counter, they steal a little bit of the LSD, they bring it back home, they turn on their friends, and soon they're turning on the whole world. Because basically out of the Ken Kesey thing became the first acid tests, which were the very first raves. So these were multimedia interactive experiences. It wasn't where you were going to see a concert. You actually went into this acid test place and they had LSD Kool-Aid, you go and experience it, but there was microphones everywhere. They could record you while you're saying something, and videos of this and that, and it's all playing all around you, and lights, and these were the very first experiments in technological psychedelia that were happening. And this is just spin-offs of basically what, like a CIA experiment, so that went horribly wrong in some sense, or maybe it went horribly right. Maybe this is something that they had planned in some way as well. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can look at the nexus of these things. Acid test spinning off into the Grateful Dead. So then you have the Grateful Dead that becomes a huge hit, and now they're traveling all across the world. And their sound man, who's Owsley Augustus Stanley, is one of the most famous LSD makers of all time. So their sound man is traveling all around the world with this music. So there's definitely a connection between technology, psychedelics, music, San Francisco, the 1960s period, and all this. That's super deep and super interesting. And all these people are all mixed up in it. All the people that were creating the original microchips and the original software and the original hardware, they are all mixed up in this Grateful Dead LSD technology soup that happened there.
I also have read a lot about Robert Anton Wilson and Tim Leary. And these guys, are you familiar with their work?
I'm definitely familiar with both their work. I love Robert Anton Wilson. The Illuminatus trilogy was definitely a very formative 3-book series that I loved a lot. I read it probably right after I read the Electric Kool-Aid acid test. Yeah, that was some of the stuff that I did have access to back in the pre-internet days was Robert Anton Wilson and Tim Leary. So definitely familiar with those guys.
Yeah, they were very influential for me also. And so they talk about the different levels of consciousness and how we are all raising the consciousness and how some of us can be pioneers and go into this higher before the main population do it. And this with creating our own reality, right? So it goes together with LSD and then having programs and then being able to see our external reality as part of a dream, or so to see the reality as a dream. Could you talk a little bit about your experiences? Like, when do you feel that you're in a reality and it feels so real as the normal one, like a dream? And then to be able to go back and forth between different dreams.
I mean, that's definitely pretty heavy question. I think that moving back and forth between different consciousnesses is something that I'm pretty familiar with at this point, and I definitely feel comfortable doing that. And I think like by learning the ways that your consciousness works a little, you're able to fine tune it for different situations. And sometimes you have some flexibility. Sometimes you might end up in the wrong consciousness set in the wrong environment, but that's usually easy enough to change. And that's also something with the psychedelic experience that's important for people to understand, is that one of those things when you are in a space where you know, things aren't going good, or you don't feel good about it, you know, hey, I don't like where I am, I don't like this music, the easiest thing to do is just change your environment. So you just move out of that environment with where you're at, and that could be changing your physical environment, changing the people, changing the music, changing, you know, the sounds you're hearing. Any of those simple changes can be enough to totally change the experience. So I think that's just something worth noting there.
It's something about separate realities and being able to differentiate between the
right, like what do you,
timelines.
where, yeah, what are we trying to, yeah, like maybe re-ask the question, because I was I think I was like, yeah, going off in a different direction.
Also for me, this is very, very difficult area actually. So I have experiences, and I think I'm still a little bit afraid of them. So I'm a little bit confused. So I had this period when I was reading Robert Anton Wilson, and like I was really sucked into his book. So I started experiencing my physical life as a dream. So I started acting as if it was a dream. And it worked to a certain point, and then it was then it didn't work so well anymore. So I was sort of kicked out. I was just wondering if you had any similar
No, I got
experiences.
you. And then you were talking about the creating your own reality thing as well, and how that kind of plays into the different consciousnesses and whatnot. So I think there's different sides to the creating your own reality, because I'm actually a huge believer in that. And I think, you know, like by putting certain goals, you know, in front of us, we actually limit ourselves to thinking like that you can only reach that goal, whereas you may be able to potentially reach much further than that. But like, as far as creating your own reality, like I think there's a threshold in it where there's got to be some action, because there's like the whole, I remember this movie from the early 2000s or something called The Secret, where they were telling people it was like the law of attraction, and you just have to think that you'll be rich, and like eventually you will be rich. Like I think like that's far to the other side of what I would think is creating your own reality. I don't think like that's going to be taking it far enough. I think you actually have to go take the steps that are going to bring your like you kind of have to take the steps that will actualize that reality in your real life. You can't just like think about it in consciousness terms. And I think that's true with so many things in our lives. Like I was telling my wife the other day how, you know, it's very important to go out of the realm of ideation and into the world of action, because, you know, you can just think about things for so long, but until you actually go out and put your feet down and take your first steps, you're just in the world of whataboutism. You're not actually gonna go do this thing. So I definitely think you can change your own reality to the point that like stuff has changed for me so far beyond what I've even believed possible, that I just want to say that, yeah, anybody can do this. It's just a matter of just kind of believing in yourself ruthlessly and just following your own personal vision. Just kind of just whatever you believe is your path, you just kind of have to follow that at the exclusion of all else. And yes, that means there's a lot of sacrifice socially in other ways that you may not be used to. But, you know, if you don't make those sacrifices, you also may not reach what you're trying to reach. And also just be flexible to know that what you're trying to reach is an intermediary goal to the next step. You know, like each thing just brings you to where you can accomplish the next thing. So each thing that you're doing levels up your skill set. You actually know how to work in the world a little better. You're a little more agile. You can do things a little better than you could a few months ago. So you're able to use that as a stepping stool to get to a place that, you know, last year was just unthinkable. So if you just kind of keep going up in these slow incremental steps and just following what's important to you, then really who cares what else is important to other people, or what's going on in the news, or what's going on, you know, down the street. It's what's happening in your house, you know, in your mind and in your body that's going to be important at the end. That's what you need to follow, I think.
I had this, so I'm going deep now. That's why I'm a little bit confused. I'm trying to stretch into those memories when I went to those separate realities there.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't have a lot of experience with like the dream state part of it where you were saying, where you're kind of like treating reality as if as if it's not. I mean, I do have a time in my life that I did that. I had like this really intense LSD trip in the 90s that like things got way too far, but it wasn't purposeful. It wasn't like I was purposely like trying to say that reality was different. I was actually like, just experiencing it differently because my mind had basically broken and so like that it wasn't really relevant. I didn't feel necessarily to what you were talking about. So where you're saying you treating
maybe it's similar to what we are saying. For me, it was just so I just took it further and further and further, and then they said, that it's just different environments. You're always in a dream somewhere. It doesn't matter really. It's always a dream. So when I push that, like similar to you, like proof of work, you just try something, and because you can't trust, your mother and father and the politicians, so it's like about figuring out by yourself. So I pushed that really far, and then similar like you said, bad things started to happen, and I ended up in the hospital, and I almost died. Yeah, so I had I actually was dead for a few hours, and then I came back
wow.
again. So it was a huge experience. So when I started thinking about this, it was like, oh my God, and I couldn't let it go. And what can you explain your experience when something like that happens? You said in the 90s.
Yeah. So I I had actually been in an apartment with some friends. Was living with some friends, and we had gone out to this uh, party in the middle of Florida. It was in the orange groves, and it was basically just this hippie party. And uh, I had got on this like thought trip that since you like LSD isn't doesn't do any organic damage, like it doesn't do any damage to your body, that just can't hurt you. You could just eat as much as you want. Like tear like I'd say like a month where I just ate this ungodly amount of LSD, and during that time, just my mind, like the way that I was interacting with the world was certainly dreamlike in many ways, and there was just so many times where I did things that were just face palmable or just like you just not things are just not together, but it didn't really matter because I was able to like float myself through this whole thing, this just huge imaginary state because I had enough resources at that time built up and things just stocked up and saved around where I was that I was able to just continue this fantastic living up until the point where I could no longer do it. And at some point, like I just remember I had divided the whole house of friends up into future friends and old friends, like people that could go with us into the future and this weird shit we're going to be doing, and then people that we have to leave behind because we love them and we just don't want them to get hurt, and with like this weird adventure that we're about to go on. And at that point, really, I started to kind of freak out in the sense that I just knew that I just wasn't interacting with the world in a normal way. And I just went downstairs to the pool at our house, and like there was these kids there, and I felt like they were DEA agents, and they were like a little 7-year-old and something like playing at the pool. And I'm like, man, you guys, I feel really bad for you. You're gonna lose your jobs because you're gonna arrest me for something that I didn't do. I'm not doing anything. And like so and then at some point I remember ending up like in the dumpster looking for valuable things, and I actually found like this police manual that was like their operational manual. So like like where my mind's going with all this is insane, and it turns out that actually like the guy that lived upstairs in us from the apartment actually was a police, and he really needed that manual, and like his wife like came and she needed to get it back because he was going to get in trouble for throwing it out. So like all this insane stuff is going on, and like I'm just like not kind of how you said life is a dream, like things just aren't stacking up chronologically. I even had like a time travel experience during it where I did some nitrous oxide one night at the party that we were having in the apartment, and I inhaled the nitrous oxide, and it just felt like time actually moved backwards for about 5 minutes. I just experienced time, like the same exact thing that I just did for the last 5 minutes, and I ended up in the same exact place where I was sitting, and it was just then just time just went right back. So it was like super weird. And I had a TV that was linked up to the security system at the apartment complex. I could just watch on TV people coming in through the building, and I was just not okay. So at some point I told my friend like, yo, I think I need to go to the hospital. And that was actually like the worst decision of my life, but none of my friends knew what to do with me. Like I was like the most far out person you could imagine of anybody anywhere. So they didn't really know what was the appropriate thing to do with me. So yeah, take him to the hospital. So they took me to the hospital, and like
Mental
that was
hospital,
just insane.
I guess.
Yeah, well, yeah, they took me to just a regular like emergency room at first, and I
Mm.
even remember like feeling a little weird about it. And there was like a guy kind of guarding the door, and I like went to get up to go leave, and I felt like he was blocking the door. Like, now that I'm in here, like, oh fuck, I'm trapped. And yeah, at some point they had me like strapped to a gurney, and like then the cops come in and they're like, yeah, we know this guy, and like yeah, it's just like the whole thing's just going insane. And then they would bring me from, they're like trying to ask me to sign these papers. I'm like, no, fuck you, I'm not signing nothing. Like, so they just wrote patient unable to sign on all my documents, and then took me from the emergency room to the actual mental hospital. And then yeah, they brought me all the way up to the top floor, where it was just like the most craziest of the crazy people. Oh boy, did I have fun in there, because man, just every single person was like equally as crazy as me, I figure. So we were just ripping it up there, trying to figure out what the hell reality is and what's going on. And
On
then
the
they
top
started
floor,
feeding
you
me
said?
all these weird drugs. Yeah, yeah. It's in Fort Lauderdale, actually. They had the Fort Lauderdale Mental Hospital. It's in a really beautiful neighborhood and stuff. So, um, although the view there wasn't really awesome from my room, I think I had a view of the garbage area, and it was actually the view where the van came in and out, where the van brought in new people and stuff. So I was always like praying to the van that it would like take me out of there and stuff. And I never got out until my insurance ran out. I was basically like, they're like, oh well, you don't have no more insurance. You can't pay us, so good luck. You don't have to stay here, but you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. So at that point, I was just out on my own, and my family was like, "Oh, you can't be in South Florida anymore." They sent me out to live with grandparents and stuff. And I remember going to walk with them in the mall out there, and it was just, like you just see people going by, and it's just super surreal. Like, you're just like, the whole world is not the place that you remember. And they sat me down to do some kind of questionnaire for, I don't know, I'm not even sure where I'm going with this, but certainly I have some experience in working with the world not being the same as what your brain is probably telling you it is. So, and also going to the hospital from that. And, they told me, like, if you look at the paperwork, it's like, I was, I guess, level 50 or whatever that's supposed to be, like fully psychotic. And they even told me things like, you'll never read again, you will never hold a job again, uh, things like that. Like, I was basically, they're like, he's going to need to be in care with somebody for the rest of his life. He's never going to be okay. So I had to kind of go from this framework, which is the doctors who you trust, from your whole life are telling you this, to, do you actually believe that's going to be the frame of reference you live in? So I had to actually like dig myself out of that. And like, one of the first things I did after I got out of the hospital, I was still crazy as fuck, but I was like at my grandparents' house, like in another state, and I like got books and I was reading. So I was like, finishing the first book was a very big deal to me after that, for sure, because it was like, this just shows that these people are bullshit, and you could actually do whatever you want to do, So it was like, and the weirdest thing of all of this is that, like, after all this crazy shit, like, what got me out of the weird LSD trip was more LSD. Like, I ended up going to this other festival that happened out in the Everglades, and I ran into some people on a hippie bus there that were my buddies, and somebody gave me some gel tabs, and like, that just reset me. Like, after that experience, I just, like, when the LSD wore off from that, it was like back to baseline, and then from there on out, I was like, not psychotic anymore. I don't know. It's like certainly a weird way that you run into these flows of things that you just kind of have to go through. And it's like, yeah, it's horrible. It's like, but it's like I said, some of these things have consequences if you're irresponsible with the way that you use them. And I don't think that any of this was due to LSD. This was due solely to me being horribly irresponsible with myself and my body. Like, that was not like any kind of thing wrong with LSD. That was something wrong with the way that I had approached it. And I think that these things do have consequences. Same thing with Bitcoin. You send Bitcoin to the wrong address, there's consequences, which I've also done. I sent a whole Bitcoin to the wrong address back in 2016. And yeah, I was like, oh shit, there's no like recall button, like undo, like you like call the bank and get this back. And luckily, like, we were able to, like, we knew the person with that address, and they did send it back. But it was, I've made mistakes all along the way. So I think it's like the hard way, but once I learned the lesson, I'm pretty good at assimilating it and not making it again.
Yeah, for me, it was a similar thing because, like, when you're on a trip and it's just, you have to face your fears, and you talked about near death And this is, so when I was in that experience, I came to a point, because I treated my physical reality as a dream or a trip. So I came to a point where I have to just face this, come to this like near death or ego death experience where I should just drown myself. So this was like the flow was just leading me to go into the water, start breathing the water. And it was this
Wow.
very similar feeling like on a trip. Like if you don't do this, you don't pass to the next level, It's always this, you need to face your fears, do the worst possible thing, and then you're free on the other side. So that's what I did. I just like go with the flow. I drown myself. And then after a few hours, someone found me and they called the ambulance and I was restored. And I wake up in a hospital. And when I woke up in the hospital, then my parents came and picked me up and they drove me to a mental hospital. And I had to be on the top floor on the mental hospital, same as you. So I lived up there, quite good view. And then the next task, was just for me to, okay, next task is now I should just convince them that I'm a normal person so I can walk out of here as soon as possible. So it took me 5 days to create a rational identity and convince them that I was normal and that it was just a trip, just a mistake. And
I was
it's
trying
like,
to do that too the whole time. I was not able to convince them that I wasn't crazy. So that's great that you were able to actually do that in 5 days. Because I kept like being like, dude, I sit with the doctor. It's for sure they should let me out. Like I'm obviously not crazy here. Like what? So
yeah.
that's great that you're able to get out. But holy shit, dude, that's a crazy ass story. So you actually like went all the way as far as literally drowning yourself, and you totally fully on died. That is, I don't think like anybody can ever like have that experience except for I mean, wow, that's without going with the flow like you did there. I had, I have a good friend that also, had an experience where he was dead on the table and came back to life. And yeah, that's certainly got to be what do you have to say about that? Not now I'm interviewing you.
Yeah, but that was like a reset for me where it was because I had peak spiritual experiences before. So life was becoming more and more and more like a dream. So I could see more and more energies. I could feel everyone's auras, and everything was coming like a simulation, really, really like a simulation. Like you're consciously living in a simulation. You can feel all the programs in the people. They are behaving exactly like the programs that you see running in their energy bodies. And you see your own body moving according to your own programs in your energy body. That's that thing. What's that happened when I was 7? That's why I move like that. And now I think about that. And that's because this, then becoming so
That also
aware.
exactly happened to me. That exact
Really?
type of yes, that exact type of consciousness exactly mirrored what I was experiencing too. So you certainly keyed into an aspect of it where I felt everything was scripted in some way, like it was all kind of playing out according to some script that I didn't know, but it was all like either almost like a Truman Show in a sense, where kind of everybody else was in on something that you just weren't in on, or like certain things were happening according to the way that certain things were lined up. I remember thinking like I could get myself out of this mental hospital if I can just get things aligned appropriately. So I started putting like these like lunch sandwiches in the different plants in the rec room where we would hang out and stuff. And I figured if I could get the right geometrical configuration, we could just open this bitch up and I'll get the fuck out. But yeah, so I definitely was feeling similar to, like you said, like there was a programming and there's like a configuration thing here that we have to figure out. And once you do, it will open up certain things to you, or that is why certain things are happening, or certain things are happening according to things. I would like even pick up a note as I was just walking around. I would like pick up a paper on the floor and I would have something written on it. I think it was for me, or like if people were walking by, I'd hear these little snippets of conversation. I think they were talking like, oh, this is like something about me. Even if I was watching TV, I would think like the people on TV were talking like directly about me or to me. Like there was a very the interaction with the world was hyper connected to me, to my consciousness in that time.
Synchronizations, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's similar, but I felt like when you were saying that yeah, that was something that I went through too.
Yes, yes. And so, I dedicated my life to becoming aware of that level of awareness while not being affected by any drugs. Because for me, when that happened, it was like, this is the truth. This is what happens. But how can I use this, or how can I live with this? So first I tried to sort of stupid myself and then dumb down myself, but I couldn't do that. I remember so well what you're describing there, that's actually the real reality. So then I started meditating a lot, and my goal was to become very clear and very conscious, and how I can live in that state, but also being able to talk with people in the shop and talk with my kids, talk with my wife and everyone. And that took me 15 years to be able to balance that. I was going up and down, in and out, until I was able to create a rational identity that people can connect with and relate to. But I was also able to be aware of all the programming, the scripting. And I also learned how to change my own scripts, my own programs. And I also learned how to change other people's programs. As you heard in that, the podcast I sent you, he experienced that his programs were changed in the meditations with me. It's because I can see those scripts and I can go into them. Similar like a trip, he just have to face the program, why it was built from the beginning, and then it's released. It's like an equation. It's like, okay, I have this problem, but if you don't look at why you created that problem, it will stay there. So we need to look at, okay, you have this problem and what caused it. And as soon as we go into it and we understand the cause, it's like opening a key, and that program just melts. And then this doesn't happen in their life anymore. You solve that equation. Yeah.
That is absolutely amazing, because and I do think, like you're saying, I do think also that by going through that there and then having to figure out that rational personality that people can interact with, also gave me some insight as well, where it's like, okay, you have to rebuild a personality that's like socially acceptable in some way and not like totally off the rocker. But also you want to be aware that some of the insights that you got are valid and real, so it's time to start filtering for what's real and what's not, and then you kind of build upon that. And it's a constant game of evaluating each new transaction that comes into your node and saying, is this valid or invalid? And you just reject every invalid transaction that comes into your node, and like you build up a resiliency. It's almost like Bitcoin goes through this versioning, so you're going through versioning as you're making these realizations. So each day you're kind of growing up a little more, because you're getting a little finer tuned as to how your interactions with the world are, something that you can leverage for yourself that's valuable, or at least protect yourself from the threats that arise from that.
Yeah, and coming back to when you were saying that you like to take action to change. So to take action, you're acting out a program, right? So one way is to sort of create new programs. Like, I want to become like that. I want to act like that. So you create that action. This is what you do. So in your trip or in your space, you can sort of create a program that will make you do stuff. And that's great. The other aspect is also to look at what is not good in the outside and find a corresponding program inside and change that. So you're actually using one part of the manifestation part where you create an action. You think of it, and then you make your body do it. So what I'm also doing then is I'm also cleaning up all the old programs. You're sort of adding new programs on top, if you see what I mean.
I like this analogy in the sense of programming and coding, because you know, you look at software as a holistic entity, but it's actually not. It's actually a whole bunch of individual lines of code. So each line of code, you know, in a sense, it may not have to be rewritten or thrown out. It may just be a single line of code that needs to be debugged there. So I do think that that's a very interesting analogy. I would challenge the fact that I think, yeah, to get most changes, you're going to need to take some kind of action. To do that, you know, you do have to think about it first, actually, and that action doesn't necessarily have to be physical, but I think that it most likely would have to be in some sense. But certainly you can just think about things and come to realizations that are valuable, and leverage that. I don't have any problem with that. But I definitely think, like, but yeah, for most situations that I would, for me, I think, yeah, if I have a problem that I'm addressing, or an idea that I want to create, because I actually have a whole sketchbook that's got millions of ideas that I would like to create, but I just don't have enough time and energy and money to create every single one of them. So I can only like do what I have time for. So to some degree, it's like a little bit of filtering there as well. Like you have to take your ideas and, okay, focusing on like what's the best of these, and actually kind of call those out, so that you're actually kind of filtering to get this super high 1% of whatever it is that you're doing is the absolute best, and kind of focus there, because you could spend all your time doing it on the 99% of stuff that's going to take your time and energy, and just busy yourself away. Not that that's in any way relative to what you said, so maybe I'll just kind of end that there.
Yeah, but if you look at the programs that we have, they are actually changing our external reality, because the programs we have inside, if you remember your vision, you know, when everything is scripted, it's not just your actions that is scripted, it's also what you attract, like the people that you come. And so if you have like crappy programs of abuse, that's sort of replaying, so you're attracting people that will abuse you. All right, so that's a program. It's inside of you, but it's changing your external reality. Can you agree with that part?
Absolutely. But to get out of that situation, you're going to have to change. You're going to have to take the action to change the way that you're interacting with the world, and stop inviting abusers over, because that's a very good example. I was going to start to say like, hey, let's get some examples, and say like, well, all right, say I have a problem. I have, like, you know, I'm hanging out with the wrong people or something, and they're leading me down the wrong path. Like, what, like, in my mind, you would just take an action to just not hang out with those people anymore, in whatever form that takes. You know, like, I just think there's always going to be an action required, that if you've identified a problem in whatever meditation you're in, that you, like, okay, you say, hey, these programs are bad for me. I'm like doing all this stuff because I actually believe these incorrect things, and I need to let go of that now and then go do new things. Well, yeah, that letting go of it is in a sense an action, right?
Well, yeah, no, I'm saying if you delete the abuse program, you will stop attracting those people. So you don't have to take the action of avoiding them, because you move to another place, you will still attract them, because you still have the program.
No,
So
absolutely, that's
the
true. I see what you're
smartest
saying,
thing
in the
is
sense that,
to
yeah, you have a
delete
program
the
that's
program.
attracting them. Well, the deleting is still going to be an action, I'd argue. But yes, you are
Yes,
correct.
yes.
Yes, it's going to be that you would need to, you know, like, you'll need to make a change, whether that's deleting the people or deleting your program. But either one of those, I would consider, like, it would require the positive, like the positive action of putting that line in the sand and saying, like, I reject this program. I'm taking it out of the configuration file. We're no longer running this in our operating system. Like, that is like that's a very sovereign step within your own operating system to make, and it is a conscious action, I would argue. I fully get
Yeah.
what you're saying, and I'm on board with it. I just think we're just like semantics here, literally.
Yes, we're trying to sort of connect our worldviews here, right? So
Yes.
for example, when you go into a trip, this could be one of the things that you would be faced with, you know, your abuse pattern. So maybe you have this vision, or you feel is that you're abused. And then if you don't face that, the program will stay in you. But if you face it, you go with the flow, and then you sort of will relive it, right? And then you will be immersed in it, and then it will go, and then it will release, because you're actually facing that. And that is the reprogramming. So then you will stop attracting these abusers, Does that make sense with your worldview?
Absolutely, yeah. Now I definitely see the connections happening here because yeah, in many ways it is that very similar process of going through it. And even though I was saying going with the flow, what that actually entails is, it sounds like it's just going along on a ride, but what that actually entails is more active in the sense, like you were saying, like you're actually identifying the problem, the program that's the virus that's actually infecting your system. You are doing antivirus work on your own, like
Yes.
consciousness and body, and then you, like your own antivirus is able to identify and expel this virus that's keeping you back, that's holding you back as a person, that's messing up your life, and you're actually able to delete that. So yeah, I think we're saying the same thing here. So that's good. Neat to work through it like that in words. Words are just so clumsy. I've heard so many people say it's like a really tough way to communicate. We just do the best we can.
Yeah. So if we summarize this discussion, then it's like, if we do the work, we face our bad programming. So we stop attracting bad situations. And then we're able to think of new ways, because then it's like you clear the slate sooner or later. If you keep on going, it's like you become less and less programs. But what should you do then? And then it's like you use your imagination to think of what you most enjoy to do, or how can I express myself? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I think that was one of the things that we touched on before, where it's saying, and this was an idea I like that Canute said the other day. He said, the killer app of Bitcoin is you, in the sense that Bitcoin can actualize you in so many ways by giving you so many things, and in both like the way that you think about the world, the way that you interact with the world, as well as financial sovereignty, self sovereignty, mind sovereignty, all these things um, that these things are, and I like, I would also argue that psychedelics do the same thing. Like their killer app is you. Like psychedelics are very, I'd say, like LSD and psilocybin, they're a constant. The variable is you. You know, it's the things that happen within the psychedelic experience are only a factor of who you are, your personal body chemistry, everything that you've learned up to this point, your whole like that's the variable. So the constant is Bitcoin and psychedelics. So these things are these tools that actually activate you. So it's up to you in a sense to kind of find out who you are, and by that process of finding out who you are and actualizing yourself, it's a really interesting feedback loop that happens within these things. And I think they're self-supporting and self-sustaining, and they do riff off of each other. And then if you can find enough like-minded people that are interested and kind of support that worldview, you kind of all grow together in a very holistic and ethical and beautiful way. So I hope that there's some hope of that coming true. You know, like there's always forces that fight against that, but it's up to us to kind of use and leverage these tools to actualize who we are. If nothing else, like what is that for? Every tool is to just work with the world better. And if you can't work with yourself better in the world, like what value is anything?
That's a really good place to finish this. I think you said it really well. Maybe if I say it in my words, it's like responsibility that could start with taking your own Bitcoin into cold storage, for example, and then moving into improving our health, our mental health. And we come then to look at our programmings, and we can use tools to refine who we are, our actions, and create new actions, and find like our essence beyond all the programming that was added to us from society, from family and schools and so on, and to come closer and closer to our true self and find ways to express it. And it's the path of Bitcoin. Does this resonate with you?
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful place to leave it. I would like to just let listeners know that we just covered so much different ground here, that there's a lot more in the article that I have. So if you are interested at all in the conversation on Bitcoin and psychedelics, that I did lay out a lot of different things in the article that we didn't get a chance to touch on here. So there is a lot more in the rabbit hole that I have thoughts on. So if you are interested in any of that, just please check out the article. But other than that, I think this has been extremely fun time.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely recommend to go and read the article, and I will put it in a link in the show notes also.
Thanks.
So thank you very much, FractalEncrypt, for coming on here today, sharing your experience with us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. We'll have to do this again.